Hello, boys and girls. This is Mrs. Gabriel. I am presenting to you part 1 of Chapter 9 on water resources. This is through the Andrew Friedland and Rick Ralia's book on environmental science for AP. This chapter is specifically about our resources for water, and really we're trying to answer the question, will we have enough usable water in our future? Because fresh water is an irreplaceable resource that we're managing very, very poorly. We live on a water planet with a precious layer of water. Most of it is salt water. Actually, salt water covers about 71% of the Earth's surface. And if you look in the mirror, what do you see? It's about 60% water. Most of it's inside your cells. Water is an amazing and irreplaceable chemical with unique properties that keep us and other forms of life alive. We could survive for several weeks without food. You know that, right? But we can only survive a few days without water. And in addition to that, it takes huge amounts of water to supply us with food, energy, and most of the other things that we humans use to meet our daily needs and desires. Water also plays a key role in sculpting the Earth's surface, controlling and moderating the Earth's climate, and removing and diluting some of the pollutants and wastes that we produce. So fresh water is one of the Earth's most important forms of natural capital. And despite this importance of water and our fresh water, water is one of our most poorly managed resources. We waste it, we pollute it. We also charge just a few pennies for making it available. And this encourages greater waste and pollution of this very valuable resource, for which we have nothing to substitute it. Access to water is a global health issue. Health impacts. The World Health Organization, or the WHO, estimates that every day an average of about 4,000 children younger than the age of 5 die from waterborne infectious diseases because they don't have access to safe drinking water. Water is also an economic issue. Think economic impacts, because it's vital for reducing poverty and producing food and energy. It's also a societal impact on women and children in less developed countries, because half of the world's people do not have water piped to their homes, and as a result of that, poor women and girls are often responsible for finding and carrying daily supplies of water from wells and from other sources of water that are very, very, very far away from their homes. It's also a problem with national and global security. This could be an issue with water because of increasing tensions between the U.S. or other countries that are at war or almost at war within and between nations over access to limited water resources that we happen to share. Water is also, most importantly, an environmental issue, because excessive withdrawal of water, that's using too much of it from rivers and aquifers, results in falling water tables and decreasing river flows, shrinking of lakes, and the disappearance of wetlands. This loss of water, in combination with water pollution, result in declining water quality, lower fish populations, species extinction, and degradation of aquatic ecosystem services. Big problem. This opening picture introduces us to the Klamath River, which is a river that runs about 400 kilometers or 250 miles from southern Oregon through northern California and then empties into the Pacific Ocean. This river, the Klamath River, was once a spectacular river, and it's most famously known for its salmon, and the Native American Indians were the group of people that mostly used it. And as population grew and as land development occurred over the century, we dammed the river for electricity. That's hydroelectric damming. And farmers settled in the land, and they diverted the water for irrigation. Diverting means they took the water from the river and let it go to their farms instead of just keeping it in the river. The salmon population was amazing and expansive, But because of the damming of the river, we created problems with the fish migration. And if the fish weren't able to migrate all the way upriver, then they weren't able to continue with their life cycle. So the United States Bureau of Reclamation also decided to install some canals in the early 1900s, and they did that in order to, no lie, drain two very large lakes that were the source of the river. When this happened, we exposed lake bottoms, and what did we do? Instead of going, oh no, we're running out of our lake water, we built farmland on it. And then the water that drained into the canals provided a source of irrigation for the new farmland. Then we made even more bad decisions and built 4 hydroelectric dams along the river all through the 1900s. Now, the pros of this, the dams generated enough electricity for thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of homes. And since hydroelectric dams actually generate less pollution than other sources of electricity, they provided a nice benefit to that region. Still, the fish could not migrate. So as time went on and multiple uses of the Klamath River started conflict, then additional things happened, such as less winter snow. And with less winter snow, there was less melting snow in the spring. And with less melting snow, there was even less water available. And there was less water available for the farmers to use. And then in addition to that, we reduced the river's flow to low levels, and the salmon weren't able to even do part of their migration. Then the U.S. Endangered Species Act actually was used to help protect the salmon, and many other Native American groups and the hydroelectric company and farmers and commercial fishermen started having serious conflicts with one another because of all the reasons that they wanted or did not want the dams to continue, and now there was less water flow. So in 2002, there was this massive die-off in the river of all these fish, particularly the salmon, and this was caused because of unusually warm water, the growth of toxic algae, and diseases. So we lost 30,000 large salmon, and they were about 100 pounds each. Think about that economically, and think about that devastation for everyone that lived in that region. In 2009, all the parties that were in conflict actually ended up coming up with an agreement. The hydroelectric company is going to, by the year 2020, remove the dam. And when that happens, they think all their problems are going to be solved. Conflicts over this use of water are nothing new, and because they actually were able to reach a decision that they all agreed on, then we're thinking that this is a conflict resolution that the world is going to look at in the future to help with other people solving other problems. So, we use water for fun. We use it for drinking, recreation, and drinking. And we use it for some other stuff. Take a look at the list. But we don't have enough fresh water readily available for all of the human population. We are wasteful, we don't protect it, we don't try to conserve it, and there are conflicts as a result of it. Water keeps us alive, it moderates the climate, it sculpts the land, it removes and dilutes wastes, but only about 0.02% of the Earth's water supply is available to us. Now, these are some of the terms that you should know when you're learning about water. Obviously, most of these terms you do know, but just in case you don't, I would think the ones that really stick out are brackish water, which is a mix of fresh and salt water, typical in estuaries. I would think that you probably have heard of hard water and soft water, but soft water usually is water that does not have minerals in it. Hard water is water that has minerals such as calcium and magnesium in it. And then there's storm water. Storm water is what we talk about when we refer to runoff. Now this should look familiar to you. This is the water cycle, or the hydrologic cycle. They mean the same thing. So with so much water on our planet, what's the big deal? Well, let's make sure that we recall the water cycle before we really get into the details about this. So just take a look at it and try and find the things that I'm talking about. So there's precipitation, which comes in the form usually of rain or snow, and it infiltrates the ground and is stored in soil and rock. And when it becomes stored, we call this groundwater. Then there's some precipitation that does not infiltrate the ground, and it does not sink into the ground or evaporate into the air, and it runs off, and we call that surface runoff, and it runs off into other bodies of water. It just runs downhill. The land from which the surface water drains into a body of water is called its watershed or its drainage basin. And here's just another picture to show you the same things. So you should know in your hydrologic cycle where evaporation happens, condensation. So look for the pictures. Condensation is when that water vapor rises and then cools again. And then when that cooling air starts dropping to the surface again, that's precipitation. Make sure you know how to use the word precipitation and not just rain. Okay, so when we talk about groundwater, just take a look of when the water infiltrates the ground. We're going to get into this in more detail in part 2, but that infiltration going into the groundwater, look where all the places where it can happen. So if you look all the way to the left of the picture, sometimes that water goes right into a recharge area, like a lake. Well, that's easy. And then the lake just has an area in the lake where it's very easy for that water to infiltrate much deeper into the ground. And it can go into something that we call an aquifer. Sometimes the water can infiltrate directly through the rest of the land's surface, right through the grass. So you should know how the water can get deep into the ground, because we use that for our freshwater resources. And then take a look at another picture just to show you again how this works. Go ahead and feel free to pause this so that I don't have to stay frozen on one picture. Okay, so the things that you really should pay attention to are the amount of salt water that we have on the planet, so over 97%. Now keep in mind, 71% of the whole planet is water. 97% of that is salt water. Okay, so that leaves us a little over 2% of available fresh water. Of that 2%, about half of it is accessible fresh water for us, because the rest of it is frozen in ice caps and in glaciers, so we can't even access that. So out of the 71% of the water on the planet, not even 0.5% of it is accessible fresh water. And here's another diagram that you can pause at just to understand it in a little more depth. But remember, our fresh water, look where it says fresh water is 2.78% in this diagram. I got these from all different resources that were done during different years. So, but the numbers are pretty close. Out of the 2.7%, look how much of it is frozen. Look how much of it is groundwater. And then the water bodies is like lakes and rivers. And here it is again. And then I just wrote this stuff out for you so that if you need to look at it in sentences, that'll help you understand it more. Okay, so these are a couple of the terms that I just talked about. Make sure that you know them well. Make sure you study them. If you want to, you can pause on this at another time, but that time doesn't have to be today. And I'd like you to look now at a transition. So there's quite a few things. First, look at the title, Population and Freshwater Withdrawals. This is in the United States. Then look at the blue bars. Notice that over time, the population used groundwater more and more. It kind of steadied starting in about 1980 when people started conserving water a little more. Next, look at the surface water withdrawals in green. Surface water withdrawals, they're in green. We use surface water like lake reservoirs, a lot more than groundwater. Many residents actually of Harford County get their water from surface water, such as the Susquehanna River. We also get our water from the Loch Raven Reservoir, which is in Baltimore County. Those are both surface water sources. Notice how many billions of gallons of water used per day have increased over time with population. As population grows, we use more water, and the population just keeps on growing. Agriculture is the #1 use for freshwater withdrawal in the whole world. But what about in other countries? You should have noticed that North America and Europe use freshwater for industry more than agriculture. We also import a whole lot because we have the money and we can afford to buy things from others, such as fruits that use a lot of water. But Africa, Asia, South America use most of their water for agriculture. That is why it's the #1 culprit worldwide. Know the difference. Know what is #1, which is agricultural use, and know #2. And know that in the United States, it is not the same as worldwide. We do not represent the worldwide patterns. Okay, and then we can look at gallons used per day per person for irrigation and agriculture. So even though you might not have a farm in your backyard, you eat farm products. So that's how this number comes up for you. And even though you might not have a power plant in your backyard, you use power. So you do use water and wastewater. Okay, next transition is into water use and resource problems. So here's the 3 main categories. We either have too much water, such as in floods. We have too little water, such as in droughts. Or we have poor quality and contaminated water, such as, all the time. Take a look at the availability. And I just explained a lot of this, but now you can read it in different details. Feel free to pause it. But look at the 3rd bullet. Irrigation, which is agricultural use, is the biggest user of water. Now remember, this is worldwide, followed by industries and cities and residences. Alright, so now we're doing a little mapping exercise. Now this might take a little while for you to take in, so just kind of pay attention. But it's about precipitation. So we're looking in the United States. The first thing I'd like you to look at is the bottom map. And take a look at the dark blue. So these are our major cities. If you look at what's in the dark blue in our major cities, they want you to notice in the map what's going on between precipitation and with water, where we have water deficits or even droughts. So if you look in the top map and remember where those cities are, look where we get a lot of precipitation. So that's where our blues are, and then we have a little less in the yellows. And if you look down at the bottom map, you'll see in the white, or that light beige, you'll see that's where we have water shortages. So water shortages are where we can have potential problems because this is where people need their water. As you can see, we don't live in a region right now where there is a water shortage or a water deficit problem. That doesn't mean it's not coming. We're not conservative with our water, and we're not careful with it. Okay, the purpose of this is for you to pause in the future and for you to get to know and remember the names of the major rivers, because you never know when an FRQ or some other test question is going to come up and you're asked about the major rivers where some of the a lot of our fresh water, our tiny little fresh water that's not frozen, less than 5% on the planet, could be running into. Where are the drainage basins for all our fresh water? Well, they're going into these major rivers. So these are the major rivers of the world that you should know. And then you have the major rivers of the United States. Now, if you can find Maryland, approximately where Maryland is in the United States, what river do you think part of Harford County drains into? What is our watershed going to drain into? Well, according to the map, you should have said probably the Susquehanna. If you think outside the box, you could have said the Bush River. A lot of us in Harford County go into the Bush River, go into Deer Creek, and then eventually we all drain out of those big drainage basins into the Chesapeake Bay. Okay, so here is a list of the lakes, streams, rivers, ponds, lakes, wetlands that take up the largest surface area, depth, or volume in the world. So look how big that Caspian Sea is. And I know you're probably like, what? Caspian Sea? Where's that? Well, okay, it's in Asia, but it might come up on a test, so just remember Caspian Sea, Asia. And then think of Lake Superior. That's one that you're familiar with. Huron and Michigan. Think of the Great Lakes. Okay, so they're pretty large compared to the rest of the world. They're part of our group of our largest lakes, which is a source of fresh water. Remember, only 5% fresh water. 0.5%, sorry. And then here's just an idea of how big these lakes are in comparison to each other. They have Great Britain here just as something for you to compare to in size. Great Britain is not a lake. It's a landmass. But look how large the Caspian Sea is compared to like Lake Superior and Lake Michigan. Okay, not only do you need to know about what are the biggest lakes, because lakes are such an important, valuable resource for holding our fresh water, you also should know a little bit about the different zones in lakes, because these zones have a lot to do with productivity. So little that you should know about lakes. Lakes hold our fresh water. A lot of our biodiversity as aquatic ecosystems is found in our lakes. So how lakes form? Lakes form usually as a depression gets filled with runoff water, storm water, and fills faster from that runoff than evaporation can occur. Sometimes it gets filled by groundwater. Lakes form by plate tectonics and glaciation. Plate tectonics will kind of lift up land and then can cut off an ocean to leave a salty lake, or just, leave a depression behind. Lake Victoria is a perfect example of a salty lake because it was cut off from an ocean from being uplifted in plate tectonics. Lake Victoria is in Africa. That's why it's salty, because of plate tectonics. Other forms of lakes can happen from glaciers that scrape the landscape and leave large holes. I mean really, really large holes or depressions. And this is how they think the Great Lakes were formed, from glaciers retreating. So lakes are classified by their level of primary productivity, which is what we are looking at right here. So we have our oligotrophic, mesotrophic, and eutrophic lakes. And let's just review what these are real quick. And you can pause here in another time. But oligotrophic means low amounts of nutrients. Low amounts of nutrients. And these are usually found in northern ranges with rocky and sandy bottoms. They have very little algae. Fish found in oligotrophic lakes like cold, high oxygenated waters, and oxygen is really at high levels throughout the water column. Cold water can hold more dissolved oxygen, by the way. Then we have our mesotrophic lakes. Those are the ones in the middle. Let's look back at the picture. Mesotrophic. Take a look at the difference at what you're looking at here. And the mesotrophic lakes have moderate levels of productivity. Then we have our eutrophic lakes. Eutrophic lakes have high levels of productivity. They're very well nourished, high nutrients, high plant growth. U means true. U means true. Remember that rhyme. So eutrophic literally means true nutrients, or truly nutrient rich. So when we're talking about nutrients, as you know by now from all the labs we've done, we're talking about phosphorus and nitrogen. Eutrophic lakes are where the soils are more fertile. Eutrophic lakes are shallow. They have murky, mucky bottoms to them, so they're soft and your shoe can get stuck in them if you're walking in water shoes. They have a lot of plants and a lot of algae. Okay, so freshwater resources in the United States. The places in red and yellow are places where experts recommend you do not ever move to and try to live in your future. They think there's going to be water conflicts in these places. So beware. Conflict potentials are mostly in red. Okay, so who owns your water? There's a lot of controversy over whether water supplies should be owned by the government. Should the government run all our water, or should private companies own our water? Who do you think will do a better job? And did you know, by the way, that a lot of countries besides our own, or businesses from other countries, are trying to control the U.S. water supply by buying up the water companies? So, we don't have enough fresh water. Look at the reasons why, and look at the options that we have. What happens when you don't have enough fresh water? So the last slide in this presentation is really a question. How would you vote knowing all this information? Should private companies own or manage most of the world's water resources? Do you feel no? Do you feel absolutely like yes, they should? Do you think it depends? Or do you think yes? Should private companies own or manage most of the world's water resources? Because we're not doing a very good job right now. Do we just need to keep it the way it is? Run it a little better? Or do you think someone else should take control and just do a better job than us? Well, I hope you've enjoyed the opener to water resources. This concludes part 1. Take care of your footprint. This is Mrs. Gabriel signing off.